Welcome back to Limit Break 20. Have you ever wanted to play a spell slinger that uses the elements to completely destroy massive crowds of enemies? Well, if that's the case, then you're definitely going to watch this video and check out the Black Mage job class in Final Fantasy XIV Tabletop RPG. My name is Coleman Webb, and this is Limit Break 20, where we go over all things Final Fantasy XIV Tabletop RPG. So, a Black Mage is one of the original characters from the original Final Fantasy game and has been a staple in the series ever since. And in Final Fantasy XIV, the video game, they are a range DPS class, and DPS is damage per second. It kind of bugs me that they brought that into the tabletop terminology, but it's all good. I'll get over it. But what the Black Mage is really designed to do is kind of be the complete opposite of what the Dragoon does, which is stands back behind the front lines, behind the tank, and just rain out as much damage as humanly possible. So it's probably, out of all the character classes in the starter guide in the free materials, more than likely the most complex. And so this is something to keep in mind if you are a first-time TTRPG player. Then it might be a little bit overwhelming because it is pretty heavy in resource management and there are tons of different options. So this video is really just going to be a deep dive into the Black Mage's abilities. I'm going to follow this up with an actual tactics video, which is more of that what would you use in certain situations, because they have a ton of different options. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into their primary attributes. So looking at their primary attributes, as you can see, they have a strength of +0, they have a dexterity of +2, they have a vitality of +1, and they have an intelligence of +5 and a mind of +5. Now, one thing to know about the Black Mage is that you are going to be adding that intelligence modifier to all of your attacks, so, and your primary abilities. So just a thing that we want to address there. Next, we're going to dive into the secondary attributes. They have a defense of 11, so not really high. So if you have an enemy that's going to be attacking them with physical attacks, they might be getting hit more often than not. However, they make up for that because their magical defense is 15, which is extremely high, and a lot of characters or enemies that might be casting abilities might find it more difficult to do some damage to the Black Mage. Their vigilance is 14, and their speed, like all characters, is 5 squares. You'll notice that they do have 5 MP, and this is important because they are a spellcaster. They're going to recover 2 MP at the end of every adventure step, which is at the end of the player's turn. Jumping down to HP. HP is 21, not too low, but it's not really high, so a little bit squishier from all the rest of the characters that are available. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to jump into their traits and other effects. And this is something that we want to definitely be paying attention to because they have a lot of different things going on here. So the first thing is called consecutive invocation. And when we read it here, what it says is that on your turn, after resolving the effects of an ability that enables this trait, you can forego all your standard movement until the end of your turn to use an additional invoked primary ability. You may choose a new target when using this additional ability, and consecutive invocation can only be used once per turn and does not prevent you from using focus to prevent an additional secondary action. So this is really basically just like focus, but lets you use another primary ability. So you forego all your movement, you can use a second primary ability, but you can also forego your movement and use a second secondary ability as well. So you could be potentially getting off 4 different attacks. Now you're gonna have to manage your MP to make sure you don't burn through it, trying to do all the things you want to do, which can definitely be a challenge with this job class. So next thing that we're going to see is that there's something called Umbral Ice. And when the Black Mage is under the effect of Umbral Ice, they're going to recover an additional 2 MP at the end of the adventure step. Umbral Ice is removed when you are knocked out or if the effect is not renewed at the end of your next turn. And also, being granted Astral Fire removes this effect as well. Next, we're going to read what Astral Fire is. So, while under the effects of Astral Fire, your fire expected abilities deal an additional 1d6 damage and you do not recover MP at the end of the adventure step. Astral Fire is removed when you are knocked out or if the effect is not renewed, and at the end of your next turn, being granted Umbral Ice removes this effect. So I want to pause here and kind of dive into this. So basically, I want you to think of these two different Umbral Ice and Astral Fire as different stances. So the Black Mage is effectively kind of a stance dancer that moves in between these two different things. If you want to do more damage, you want to be having Astral Fire before you cast a fire ability. Now, the drawback with that is if you stay in Astral Fire at the end of the adventure step, you're not going to be recovering any MP. So, as you can see, you're going to have to really figure out which abilities to complement each other in order to do what we need to do. Are we trying to Nova? Are we trying to, maximize our resource? Are we trying to do sustained damage with sustained mana consumption? These are all things that I think are more complex and nuanced than just here's what you should do. And then the last trait that they have is called Thaumaturgic Shock. And it says you cannot use a Thunder spell ability such as Thunder or Thunder 2 to inflict a damage over time on a character already suffering from a damage over time inflicted by one of your Thunder spell abilities. So this just makes it so your damage over time abilities, you just can't keep stacking those. So you cast Thunder 3 times and you're doing 9 damage over time. Now, I do want to point something out, this is how I would adjudicate it if this ever came up. If I'm ever running a game and I have 2 Black Mages and each one casts a damage over time Thunder spell, I would let those stack. And the reason I would is because if you look at the wording in that last sentence, it says, inflict on a DOT on a character already suffering from a DOT inflicted by one of your Thunder spell abilities. So this is just specific to you as your individual character. So if the other Black Mage casts it, I would allow those to stack. So you may not agree with me if you're Game Master or Crystal Bear, and that's totally okay. You can do whatever you want. You're the Game Master. So next, we're going to jump into primary abilities. So the first primary ability that we're going to look at is called Blizzard. And Blizzard costs 1 MP. It targets a single target and it has a range of 10 squares. It's going to be using a d20 plus your intelligence when you go to attack the target, and you are actually targeting the target's magical defense, not their physical defense. Now, the base effect is going to deal 3 damage to the target. It's going to grant that Umbral Ice stance and enable consecutive invocation, the ability to use that second primary ability and forego all your movement. And on a direct hit, it deals an additional 1d6 worth of damage. Next, we're going to jump into Blizzard 2. So this costs 2 MP, and this is all enemies within range, and that range is a 5x5 area within 10 squares of this character. So this is going to be an AoE Blizzard attack that's hitting multiple targets. Same does the intelligence check when you're targeting magic defense. Base effect is going to be 3 damage to all targets, and it's going to grant you Umbral Ice, and if you get a direct hit, you deal an additional 1d6 worth of damage. So as you can see, Blizzard 1, single target, Blizzard 2, multiple targets, AoE effect. A little bit of a difference in mana consumption, but this gives you kind of an idea of when you should use one over the other. Next, we're going to jump into Fire. So Fire costs 2 MP. It has a single target in a range of 10 squares. Targets the enemy's magical defense. And the base effect is that it deals 3 damage to the target and it grants Astral Fire. This also enables consecutive invocation. So again, forego your movement, use another primary ability. And a direct hit will deal an additional 1d6 worth of damage. So again, this is just a single target damage, going to be being fire aspected though. Next, we're going to jump into Fire 2. This costs a whopping 3 MP. It targets all enemies within range, 5x5 area, similar range to Blizzard 2, and targeting magical defense. Its base effect is it's going to deal 3d6 to all targets and grants Astral Fire. A direct hit deals an additional 1d6 damage. So remember, when you're under the effects of Astral Fire, you're actually doing an additional 1d6 worth of damage. So even if you miss an attack, you're still doing 1d6 worth of damage. And then when you get the direct hit, you add another 1d6. So by being under the effects of Astral Fire, it actually increases your damage output fairly significantly. So next is going to be Thunder. So Thunder is a cost of 1 MP, single target, 10 squares, and this does a base damage of 3, but inflicts a damage over time for 3 damage on the target. Now remember, damage over time is an ability that an enemy that's affected by this is going to take damage specified at the end of each round. So at the end of the enemy step, basically is when that character will take damage. And once you cast it, it's already on them. Now, Thunder 1 will enable consecutive invocation. And one of the things that's nice is that you do get to roll a d20. And on a 19 or 20, you get the following proc effect. It's called Thundercloud. And it makes it so the next lightning aspected ability you use this phase costs no MP and deals an additional 6 points of damage. So that's an important kind of cool thing that you can have, especially if you open up with trying to put some damage over timeout. You proc that, and then you can use another lightning ability for free, and it's going to do a flat 6 damage no matter what you use. Now we'll jump into Thunder 2. So Thunder 2 costs 2 MP. It targets all enemies within range, 5x5 area, 10 squares, and it inflicts a DOT on all targets. And whenever the DOT is afflicted by this ability and deals damage, you're going to roll a single D20 on a 19 or 20, and the following proc effect, Thundercloud, takes place. So the cool thing is you get to roll this d20 on both of that at the end of every single round. So at least that's how I'm going to be adjudicating. That's how I read the rule. If you think differently, let me know. And the final primary ability that the Black Mage has is Sleep. It costs 2 MP. It targets all enemies within a 5x5 area. And the check that you're going to make is Intelligence. Using the magical defense is what you're targeting on the character or the enemy. Its base effect, all targets incur a -2 penalty on all checks. And that's pretty good. And this effect lasts until the targets take damage or the phase ends. Now, what you really use this for is the bottom part here, which is a direct hit. And this removes all markers generated by all targets. Now, this is huge because if you have an enemy or multiple enemies that are putting out these big AoE effects, you probably could see something similar like that in my video about running the free adventure, about Vadranois, or just putting out huge AoE effects. Well, if you can catch 2, 3, or 4 enemies into this and they all fail that check, then what happens is you're going to be in a situation where all of those AoE effects are null and void. So it's kind of a cool ability, but don't sleep on sleep. That's my really bad Black Mage joke for the video. There won't be any more, I promise. I can't promise that. So next thing we're going to do is dive into the secondary abilities. So the first ability that they have is called Scathe. Costs 1 MP, targets a single target, range of 10 squares, and it's going to deal 3 damage to the target. So this is just a flat, hey, if I got some MP, I want to put out additional damage, go ahead and cast Scathe, flat 3 damage. No check, nothing like that, so pretty straightforward. Next is going to be Transpose. Now this is a big one, especially if you're moving between Umbral Ice and Umbral Fire. And what this allows you to do is it's going to remove Umbral Ice and grant Astral Fire, or it's going to remove Astral Fire and grant Umbral Ice. Transpose can only be used once per turn, so that's a big deal. You can't swap it between the two, even if you focus. So let's say, for example, I'm casting Fire 2, and I'm getting the damage out to a big area. I was under the effect of astral fire, so I get my extra 1d6 and everything's great. But now I want to recover additional MP because I'm down to 2 or something like that. I could then use transpose, and then be in umbral ice and then recover an additional 2 at the end of my turn. Or vice versa. Let's say I'm in umbral ice and it turns out I have a ton of mana. I don't know why we'd be in this situation, but we might be. But you have a ton of mana and you say, hey, I'm going to Nova on my next round. Then what you could do is use transpose, be an umbral fire. So when your turn comes, you can drop as many of those fire abilities that you can and then switch back into umbral ice if you wanted to. So it gives you some of that flexibility. Next, we're going to dive into lucid dreaming. Base effect is you recover an additional MP at the end of this round, the adventure step. If no MP is recovered, has no effect. And this limits once per phase. And again, phases are somewhat common, so it's not a sacred resource. So don't worry about using this and trying to get some extra mana, especially if you're trying to Nova with some fire abilities. Mana front, this is restores 2 MP and limitation once per phase under the same sort of umbrella as lucid dreaming. And the last one is called Mana Ward, and this just is going to grant you a barrier of 2 HP. You can use this once per phase. Not a bad idea just to open with this. I mean, if it goes unused, then no harm, no foul, and it doesn't actually have a cost for it, so you may as well use it, get your barrier of 2 HP, and call it good. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into their instant abilities. And remember, instant abilities can't be used when you're surprised, and a character can't use multiple instant abilities on a given turn. I've talked ad nauseam about instant abilities. I think they're pretty awesome, in my opinion, much better than reactions in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. First one we're going to talk about is Swiftcast. So the trigger is any character that finishes their turn, you can immediately use one of your magical abilities, and this is once per phase. So you could have an ally finish their turn, you could have an enemy finish their turn, doesn't matter. You can use Swiftcast and then cast one of your primary abilities or secondary abilities if you have the mana for it. Next, and their final instant ability is going to be called Addle, and the trigger on this is immediately before an ability used by an enemy is resolved. And the target is the enemy that target this ability, range is 5 squares. So what this does is this just reduces the damage dealt by the abilities of that enemy that triggered this ability by 2 until the end of this turn. So basically, you put on an enemy, any abilities that they have until the end of their turn are reduced by 2. So if you know an enemy that's going to be hitting 2 or 3 different times, the tank's not doing great, the healer fell asleep, or just was too busy putting out too much damage as a healer that they forgot to heal him, go ahead and cast Addle, try to get the tank damage reduced by a little bit and keep him in the fight. Limitation once per phase. So that's it for instant abilities. The one thing that I do want to touch base on is their limit break. Their limit break is called Meteor, and you can trigger this anytime. And anyone that's played Final Fantasy knows that Meteor is kind of an iconic spell. What this is going to do is going to target all enemies within range, and it's a 5x5 area within 10 squares. And the base effect of this is it deals 4d6 damage to all targets. And if you're under the effects of Astral Fire, it's going to do an additional 1d6 worth of damage. So all in all, the ability to drop a massive AoE attack on an area is pretty awesome. And if you're under Astral Fire, a way you can put out additional damage without using any resources, which is always greatly appreciated for the Black Mage. And that's all I had for the Black Mage. We just wanted to go over their abilities. They actually, of all the characters, in the starter guide as well as the free materials. They have the most starting abilities. They have 14, whereas most have either 11 or 12. So again, as you can see between the different stances between Umbral Ice and Astral Fire, they've got a lot of resource management you got to do, and you got to sort of be thinking about, okay, where am I going to be at the end of my turn? If I'm under Astral Fire, I'm not recovering any MP. How do I fix that? Because ideally, you do want to be at least in, not in an Astral Fire or in Umbral Ice, sort of in an ideal situation. So really trying to navigate those is kind of up to you. And each situation is going to be different depending on how many enemies there are. Are you fighting multiple enemies? Are you fighting one large enemy? It kind of depends on what abilities you want to do. So hopefully you guys like this video. If you do like this content, feel free to attune to this channel by liking and subscribing. My goal is to get all of the level 30 base characters done before the launch of the Player's Handbook at the end of February, which is crazy to think it's less than 2 months from now. Plus shipping, I guess. So yeah, hopefully I can get all those done, and let me know in the comments below if there's something you want to see or you have questions, or if there's some things that have worked well for you strategically or tactics wise for the Black Mage. Definitely want to hear about it. Until next time, stay safe, adventurers.